Good evening. I'm Julián Zugazagoitia, and I have the great honor of being the director here. Tonight is a very special night, so I would also say Le Shana Tova, which means Happy New Year. It is Jewish New Year today, and I know we have so many dates and so many competing things, and I am so apologetic to our Jewish community that some of them cannot be here tonight. But it is also the 35th anniversary of the annual Joseph and Ethel Atha lecture. 35 years, so that deserves a big round of applause. Thank you. This event celebrates the life and the vision of the Athas, who have been always deeply implicated in the arts. Their legacy includes generous bequests for art that have contributed to strengthen the museum's European paintings, American paintings, and decorative art collections. We're proud tonight, very proud, to be joined by the Atha's daughter, Elaine Merriman, who's here with us, her son, Michael Merriman, and his wife, Ellen, who not only have been here supporting the museum for many years, but tonight are also accompanied by 11 Atha grandchildren. So this is a great legacy, and welcome to all of you. I think one generation more will need to expand the auditorium to welcome just the grandchildren or great-grandchildren. But tonight, and before I pass the podium, I want to remind you that we have a gala coming up very soon. So some of you were here, and just a raise of hands, who were here for the amazing luncheon yesterday of C100? All right, so you see that we can turn around very quickly, and again, we have a great staff that is putting so many things. And now, as we speak, we're installing the Picasso exhibition that will be ready for you to see on October 14th, and you will not want to miss that event. So hurry up if you have not yet bought or make reservations for that also. So that was the pitch of the day. And having said that, I know you're in for a great, great lecture where the impression for passion and fashion gone together. So to introduce properly our great speaker, Gloria Groom, please welcome one of our newest curator, if not the newest curator, but that came as we were installing and preparing to open the incredible block wing and who has been an amazing addition to our team. Please welcome the Louise and Adelaide Ward Senior Curator of European Arts, Amy Marcereau de Galland. Thank you. Are you still our newest, no? Yes, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction, and thank you also to the Atha family. I am honored to introduce this evening's speaker, Dr. Gloria Groom, who is our distinguished, as Julián mentioned, 35th annual Atha Lecture speaker. Her talk this evening is entitled The Impressionists' Passion for Fashion, and she will explore why and how painters in the late 19th century like Renoir, Manet, Degas, and Monet embraced fashion trends as they sought to capture modern life on canvas. In a time of rapid change in how people of all classes dressed, the avant-garde Impressionists and their followers were among the first to fashion their models for wider artistic goals. Dr. Gloria Groom is the chair of the European Painting and Sculpture Department and the David and Mary Winton Green Curator at the Art Institute of Chicago, an internationally acclaimed scholar and author on 19th century French painting. She has an MA and PhD in art history from the University of Texas at Austin, and a colleague of our own, Jan Schall, from back in the day at UT. She has a graduate certificate in museology from the École du Louvre in Paris. In 1993, her groundbreaking monograph, Edouard Vuillard, Painter Decorateur, was published by Yale University Press. Since joining the Art Institute in 1984, Dr. Groom has been involved in major monographic exhibitions and catalogs as organizer and author, including Gauguin, Odilon Redon, Caillebotte, Renoir, Seurat, Manet, Toulouse-Lautrec, and thematic exhibitions such as on the art dealer Ambrose Vollard in 2008, Impressionism, Fashion, and Modernity, 2012 to 13, Van Gogh's Bedrooms, 2016, and most recently an exhibition that just concluded in Chicago, and is heading to Paris, Gauguin, Artist as Alchemist, which explores the relationship between Gauguin's work in 3 dimensions and the relationship to his paintings. Currently, she's at work on a monographic exhibition looking at the late work of Edouard Manet that will include our very own block late still life. In addition to exhibitions since 2009, she has led the project for monographic online scholarly collection catalogs on the Art Institute's Impressionist collection of paintings and works on paper, involving an international team of scholars, conservators, and scientists. To date, volumes have been published on Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Caillebotte, Gauguin, and with volumes on Manet and Seurat forthcoming. Dr. Groom was awarded the Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres and Officier in 2013, and in April 2016, she was honored as the Chevalier in the Légion d'Honneur. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gloria Groom.
A very narrow staircase. I was making sure. Okay. Good evening. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for coming out. Yeah. How many people saw the exhibition Impressionism, Fashion, and Modernity in Chicago, or Paris, or New York? Some of you? Okay. Well, I'm still, it's the exhibition du cœur. It's really the one of my heart. And so tonight, I'm pleased to be kind of back in that material, and for the next 45 minutes looking at what the Impressionists did with fashion and why fashion mattered to them. I just need to find oh, here it is. Okay, here we go. So those are the dates. If you didn't see it, if you did see it, those are the dates. And I'm going to start at a different place. I'm going to start with something that made fashion matter. And really, fashion and technology have always been intricately connected. And that was the case in the 1850s. And you're looking at a cartoon which says, you know, oh, what a shame, the daughters inherited the same disease as the mother, you know, and I'm showing it to you because it really gets us into the subject matter of fashion. And so what is fashion? Fashion is urban. Fashion doesn't happen out in the fields. Fashion is not necessarily comfortable. Fashion is also not necessarily beautiful, except in the eyes of the beholder, and for these peasants, it definitely lacks. And I'm showing you another cartoon, and the man is saying, oh my gosh, I'd love to get to know her, but you know, I'm so busy and I've got to get, you know, and it's so far to get around. And that was because of the crinoline. And the crinoline was one of those moments in fashion that had a huge impact on the industry, on the way women walked, on the way people perceived, and certainly on the textile industry because of the yards and yards of material it took to cover these great cages of wire. And here you have a Winterhalter portrait, and I'm showing you this because this is really at the moment where things start to change very rapidly. The acceleration of industry, the acceleration of the class wars, if you will. So this is the end of the court. And as you'll remember, by 1871 with the Franco-Prussian War, you have a new republic, you have a different kind, and with the republic comes different who sets fashion in a republic. It's no longer the empress and her ladies in waiting, as you see in this Winterhalter. But you can look at the fashion, and the fashion in the 1850s and early 60s was to have a kind of round shoulder. They called it the bottle shoulders. It was to have these incredibly voluptuous skirts. And as you can see, these women are seated, and they're not going to get up very quickly. This is going to be one of those, you know, lotus blossom moments. And this is the reason why. So this is the cage crinoline, but it was even more of a circle in the 1850s, and it would gradually retreat, and then the front would become more of an A-line shape, and it gradually went away altogether. But it reigned for over 20 years in fashion, and so it had to be reckoned with if you were anyone who lived in the city and thought of themselves as someone of fashion. But what did it mean to be of fashion and not just wear clothes? And that's what the peasants were. They were wearing clothes. And there's a big distinction between being up to date, à la mode, and being démodé, out of style, or not having any style at all. So in the 1860s, Baudelaire writes this incredibly rich article called Le Peintre de la Vie Moderne. He writes what it's about to be modern, what it is. And for him, what it was for the painter was to capture life as it is today. That would be the eternal expression later. So don't go back to antiquity and paint them. Paint something that is of today, and of today means the latest fashion, and of today means fashion that moves with the body. And this was an incredible moment in industry because you had more railways, you had ways of getting fabrics from different places into the cities, you have printing presses that were churning out more illustrations that could be put in magazines that could be read by people. So the idea of fashion was more widespread as the classes became more middle class rather than the court and everyone else. And Baudelaire's favorite painter was not Manet, but it should have been. It was Guy Constantin Guise, because he felt that he could capture this ephemerality of fashion. And that's what fashion is. Fashion is fleeting. Fashion is that moment. But that's what he said was exciting, and he admonished young artists to look at that. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, is it's this seated, not going anywhere fast, and Monet, who shows the same woman, his mistress at the time, rotating around, moving, wearing fashion in a way that had not been done before. And that was the conceit of the catalog, was to actually show dresses that the artists were seeing and how they interpreted it in their paintings and how they made incredible works of art using fashion as their theme. Yeah, two ways to be a Parisienne, by birth or by dress, absolutely. And Arsène Houssaye, we'll talk about him in a little bit. So here's Monet, young Monet, just from the Havre. So he's not a Parisian of birth. He's somebody that comes to the big city, and he has to make his way, and he wants to make it in the Salon, because that is where everyone gets their start in the 1860s. So he shows this landscape that he's painted at Chailly, but he also shows something that was incredibly unusual for Monet, but he was trying to get himself noticed at the Salon. He paints a portrait of of his mistress, Camille, at the time, who they were living, they had no money at all. He paints this large-scale portrait, the kind of portrait that would normally be reserved for people who were somebody by birth, and yet he paints her so that you don't see her face. He paints her in this green and black dress with this fur coat, and it was scandalous. Scandalous in the sense of people couldn't figure out what it was. They completely ignored the landscape, forget that. But this was big enough to matter. And what was it? What was she doing? And she's moving. And look at her train. It's not even in the painting itself. It's going outside the painting. And in French, the word for train is train. So these cartoons would talk about, that the train is leaving, or it's outside, and she's wearing her mother's clothes. The clothes are wearing her. They're so big. She looks like she's lost in it. And where did he get this dress? At this time, Gauguin, sorry, that was a Freudian slip. Too much Gauguin on the brain. So Monet was living, he had been disowned, disenfranchised by his father because he was living in sin with Camille. And so where did he get this money to buy a dress of this caliber that the critics noticed was out of green and black silk, and that they said, Camille herself, that's just a name for a young woman, that's just a name. It wasn't Madame anyone, it was just Camille, which was already kind of putting her in a class different than a grande dame. But then this dress, what was going on? Here's a close-up of that, she's kind of sucking on her thumb, the critics said, as like a child wearing her mom's clothes. But it was the dress that really attracted the attention, because the dress wasn't just a dress, the dress was up-to-date fashion. The dress was of that minute. Months after the fashion plate had appeared, he was exhibiting a woman wearing it. How did he get that dress? Did he rent it? No, because it's brand new. He can't buy it in a secondhand shop because it's brand new. There's a tantalizing letter from a friend of his. It says, Monet wants to borrow the green silk dress that I rented, or that I somehow had. I guess he did rent it. Anyway, somehow he has this dress, which is absolutely de rigueur. And what is he doing with it? He's showing her in motion, moving, just as Baudelaire had said that artists should do, show life on the fly. And we juxtaposed it in the exhibition because you have to know what these artists, these younger artists, were doing that was so incredibly different than what had been done before. So we showed Pierre-August Renoir, a portrait of his wife, so clearly identified. And here she is, full-length portrait, but it's much more understandable. She is a portrait, and she is against this nebulous background, but you see her in interior, and it is a very proper kind of portrait. And look at the difference in the way he's painted it. So the idea of Monet, he apparently was not able to finish the painting he was working on at the time, and so he whipped off this. I don't think that's true. This is a painting that looks like he spent plenty of hours in working on, but look at the way the hands. So this is that gesture that women would do, the tighter the glove, the richer you were. Fits like a glove really was, and so she's going to take it off and then air her hands. It was a very sexy gesture for women. But look at Monet. You can't even tell if it's a glove or her hand because it's just strokes of paint indicating that, although she should be gloved if she's a proper young woman. And so in the exhibition, what we wanted you to do, and I think it was something that was interesting, was you'd look at the painting and then you'd look at the actual garment, a garment that was similar. It wasn't the garment because we don't know where that garment was, but a garment of the same fabric. And then you would go back and forth. And what was so fascinating about the exhibition, and I heard it from more than one person, is that the garment didn't live, but the painting lived. Somehow the dress lived when it was in the painting, but not in real life. It died. So there you have it again. And it was fun because people would, they'd be going around looking at it, men too, but then they'd see themselves in the mirror because we decided to make them part of it. And then they'd be like, you become very self-conscious of what you're wearing as you're in this exhibition. But as I said, fashion plate up to the moment, this paletot, this kind of jacket was absolutely what wearing. Where do they find fashion, and where do artists and where do people know about it in the 1860s? Well, that was this proliferation of fashion magazines and fashion prints. And think about the Singer sewing machine from the 1840s. By now, you could own one, middle class could own it. They could do it themselves kind of fashion. And you would find paper patterns, which were also invented in the 1860s and which would be put in ladies' magazines that you'd pick up at the railway station and take with you. And you could think about what you were going to make. So all of that, as you can see, was in the minds, in the air, and it was something that mattered. Even Cézanne, and you think of Cézanne, like the least fashionable artist you could possibly imagine, maybe Van Gogh, but definitely Cézanne. Even he, at the beginning of his career, had to contend with Baudelaire's, être de la vie moderne, be of modern times. And so what does he do? He copies a fashion plate. And as you can see, he turns the conceit of a fashion plate, which was usually showing groups of women or single women, and they were either indoors with their children or flowers or outdoors with flowers. He's turned it into something different. Now the umbrella is dripping instead of the little fringes. It looks like blood. The flowers are gone, so you have no idea what they're looking at. So he's turned it into something creepy and romantic, but definitely using fashions as his guide. Now, the success of Camille at the Salon of 1868 was so amazing because it not only caught the eye of the critics, but the same man who said, the quote about being a Parisian, he actually ends up buying it. And he is an important man in the fashion circles. And so now people are seeing it in his home. So Monet's Camille is what puts him on the map, not the landscape. So knowing that, Renoir, who's the son of a tailor, and class plays a big role in how artists fashion their models and who their models were. Renoir, he decides he's going to try out this life-size portrait of his mistress, Lise, again giving her a first name, at the next Salon, at the Salon of 1867. Monet's was in 1866, and he puts her in the forest of Fontainebleau wearing a very fashionable, up-to-date summer dress made of the white muslin that was so ubiquitous at the time. And Zola, the great realist novelist, noticed her similarity to Camille, and he said, you know, she is a girl, one of our kind, one of our time. She's the sister of Camille. So he knew that the two first names, rather than Madame so-and-so, these were just girls rather than real, of some kind of different class. And so that, and you can see how Renoir, I mean, painting is always artificial, right? None of these look like they really look like. But it's lovely how Renoir, who was in love with Lise and used her as his favorite model for over 13 years, even though at the end of later in life, when you know, he had a child with her and he denied having even known her, but that's not true because obviously he would have known her. But you can see how he's transformed her with her fashion, and here she is with her coral earrings and her ribbon and the critics couldn't figure it out. You know, she's not wearing a crinoline. She's not properly supported. What is going on? And so they made, and the French critics are incredibly mean, but funny at the same time. And they noticed that what was going on in her tummy, you know, there was something, it's not a crinoline, what is going on? And they compared her to a grand camembert because it's like cheesiness about it. But what Renoir was trying to get at was, yes, it was a fashionable dress, but what he was trying to do, as was Monet, was to capture light on fabric. And what happens when you blast light on this white muslin that's filtering through the trees, and so you have this light-dark phenomena. That's what he was interested in, and that's, of course, what the critics could not understand. And here's the dress, that it was similar dress. We couldn't find exact dresses, but the ubiquitous umbrella, however, because handmade lace was now everywhere, and department stores were now selling pret-a-porter. You could actually go in and buy these things instead of having to go from shop to shop. So you can see how he could have amassed these things to put in his fashion statement, and how he would reuse the same dress, just change the sash, for other paintings. Lise was his favorite model, and he always showed her as she was, a country girl. This is the way he thought of her. And she tends to be, she's a seamstress, so again, that fashion connection. He's the son of a tailor, and the idea of the stripes, these incredible, weird stripes that became so in style in the 60s, because now technology, again, had introduced aniline dyes, these chemical dyes, and so colors, a rainbow of colors that were never in existence before were now available for the fabric industry. And this crazy dress that I thought couldn't possibly be true, and I thought, well, maybe, you know, she made it herself. But then you can find fashion prints like these, so these kind of apron dress, but he was using it again as a vehicle to show light and dark, and to show what happens when fabric is illuminated and is in motion and someone is doing something. And this was my favorite room in the exhibition that some people laughed at because it was AstroTurf and people got their heels caught in it. But I wanted to suggest Outofdoors, you know, that these were the places where fashion was happening, indoors and out of doors, especially for women. And another artist that we introduced in this exhibition, who I love, and unfortunately we have none of his at the Art Institute, so if anyone has one in this audience and feels generous, is James Tissot, who was a friend of the Impressionists before he left for London during the Franco-Prussian War. And again, that comparison that allows you to see how radical the Renoir and Monet and Sisley and these other artists were at the time. So Tissot is also an avant-garde artist, but when you look at his Women in White, so the same subject matter, you feel like you could make that dress. That dress is so detailed that you could copy it, that there's everything about it. And the backdrop, instead of being this integration of light dappling from the trees, is now just that. It's a backdrop that sets them off rather than includes them in the same type of light. Now, Monet, as I said, was working on a major, major project when he realized he couldn't get it done, and he had to paint Camille, the woman in the green striped dress. This was the project 14 feet high. It was going to be the largest Impressionist landscape painting that had ever been produced, a figure painting, if it had been produced. But instead, he didn't finish it. It was rolled up, and it was water damaged, and that's why you see it in the pieces it is today at the Musée d'Orsay. But it was a phenomenal attempt to make a monumental scene on that idea of women in fashion. Again, his own girlfriend repeated again and again, friends, nobody special, nobody known, people of his entourage who are posing for him in the same forest that you saw in the Renoir painting. And just to show you that he did studies for this as well, so that he could get the idea of this woman turning and what happens and how does that train, how does it come down and how does it catch the light and how do those plants kind of part of this promenade. And we had those kinds of dresses. These were called Promenade Dresses. They were just a little bit shorter than another dress. And instead of having the train would be whacked off, and you could buy the dress with the design already imprinted into it so that you could stitch it yourself like you do tea towels. So these were the kind of do-it-yourself things that made it possible for women instead of, if you read Jane Eyre, you know, Jane Eyre had her black dress and her brown dress. That was it. But now you could have dresses seasonal. You could have a spring dress. You could have a summer dress. And this was why, because fashion had come down to a level where people could either afford it or they could make it themselves. And where were women found? Where women had very limited access to being seen, but one of the places was at the seaside. And as you can see, it's not like they wear swimming suits. I mean, they're wearing basically what they'd be wearing on the Champs-Élysées. They just happen to be at the beach. And they would go out into these little dressing cabinets, and they'd be lowered into the sea with their suits, and then they came out and they would bring back up to the shoreline. And I'm just showing you, Winslow Homer did show you how ubiquitous fashion was, that at the same moment it's happening in Paris, just a month or two later, it's happening in America. Department stores, the same big department stores are starting in Philadelphia and New York. And this is a wonderful invention of the pulleys that could pull up your outer skirt so that it wouldn't drag. And so you had it attached to your waistband and you just pull it up, and then you have a kind of a different look, and then you put it back down when you're through playing croquet. But fashion dolls would be sent to the provinces or to America, and they would also give you a sense of what was the latest fashion, along with fashion prints, along with these patterns from different designers. And then your wonderful croquet game, which is slightly later, and you can see how the dresses have changed. Now that crinoline has been pushed back, and now the puff, the fabric is going to be bunched up at the back in a bustle form. So the same amount of fabric, but just differently distributed. And this wonderful sense of motion and what happens when the wind is whipping through. In our exhibition, we wanted to show that at the beach, at the, where women could be seen, but women were mostly seen in an interior until at least the 1870s, 1880s, when the actual walking dress was created, either because women were no longer going to stay at home because now they had department stores and places they could go, or because fashion was just changing. It's always hard to know which follows which, function or industry or technology catching up and doing something different. But in the interior, one was allowed to wear the robe d'intérieur, a dress that would be much more casual, that you could receive visitors in, but you would never wear on the street. And that's what this amazing painting by Manet of Baudelaire's Mistress, and you can see she's wearing the crinoline. And what happens when you wear a crinoline? Well, you bounce back up. And that's what was so interesting about Manet and Renoir. Most artists, if you had an artist, a portrait artist, they would show the woman properly seated in a way that wasn't possible. And what Manet is doing in his realist style is he's showing you what happens. You can't really sit very easily. And so she's, this little foot dangling, and she almost is like holding on to the back of the sofa to keep herself from sliding off. And that's what, these kinds of fun things were, it was just so much fun to make fun of a crinoline, and yet it had to be part of and I'm wearing one. So I went into we don't have fashion at the Art Institute. We used to have costumes, and in 1975, they gave them all to the Chicago History Museum. So I went to the Chicago History Museum, and that's me wearing it's a fake one, of course, but it really is hard to sit. You have to try it. And then when you walk, you really do sway. So there is this swish and rustle, and everything that Baudelaire found so fascinating about women's dress is absolutely because of the underpinnings and what was happening to the outer because of what's under. This is Manet's another portrait of a woman wearing, this time, a demi-crinoline. This was just a bustle rather than a crinoline. And she's, again, her Berthe Morisot, the model he loved, the muse, the great artist. So this is not a nobody. This is not a Camille or a Lise. This is a proper young woman of his class, which was very upper class. And he's showing her in Repose, as he named it, and he showed this at the Salon, and the critics went berserk because they thought, she is not properly seated. She cannot possibly be a young woman. Women don't slouch. Women sit up straight. Well, and they made fun of her, and they said that, is she seasick? And they looked at the Japanese battle scene above her head, and they were like, she is, kind of used that as a way to stretch the point that she cannot possibly be. But she was. What he was doing, though, was simply showing how she had to accommodate this kind of puff at the back at her derriere, and what that looks like. And in this wonderful muslin dress, which he's just suggested, the light and dark and these gray areas where the folds are rippling, and you're seeing what happens to color when it catches light, and then it's in the shadow. And these are just two more examples of these robes d'intérieur, these kind of dressing gowns, and they were usually made out of muslin or some kind of frothy material. And of course, for an impressionist like Renoir or Berthe Morisot, this was a fun thing to play with because you could go wild, you could froth it up. And Renoir, of course, is showing the woman who's barely playing because it's really all about feminine beauty, and the dress attributes to that. And then Berthe Morisot is this wonderful portrait of Madame Hubbard with her little mules that are kind of kicking off. This was the intimate portrait. This is the kind of portraiture that you would do of a woman in the privacy of her home. And Berthe Morisot, on the eve of her sister leaving, painted herself with her sister, and it's just this wonderful sister act, if you will, with this dotted Swiss, and you just feel that fabric, but the fabric itself is painted, and you also see the brushwork, and it's not a photographic quality. And we had that in the exhibition so that you could go back and forth between that kind of a dress and that kind of fabric and see how much more it came to life when it is paint on canvas rather than just on a mannequin. And we also wanted to show the black dress, the black dress and its importance. Black was, again, for mourning always, but it was also for fashion. And the way you would know it was because if you were wearing jewelry with a black dress, you were not in mourning. You were, as Valerie Steele writes, she says, rebaiting the trap, perhaps. And there she is. But what was interesting about the black dress, it was almost always with the see-through sleeves, which has come back into our fashion now. And there she is, and so you see the woman, we don't know anything about her, with the nursemaid and the young woman in the house because that is their domain. We tried to find one, but these are dresses that you'd be buried in, and so it was really hard to find one that was a quality. This scraggly thing, which came from where did it come from? Manchester City Museum, and we really had to work to find something that hadn't been modified because it was a black dress that you just wore again and again. And this is that idea of the transparent sleeves and definitely rebaiting the trap. It's called The Widow. And then just one more of Berthe Morisot, again showing a young woman at the balcony, that in-between era between the interior and the street. Tissot, again, for me, is the great artist of fashion because he's not too conservative, but he's not, you can always know what they're wearing. He really gives you the sense of that dress. And for him, he owned fashion. And so he would fashion his models rather than they coming in. He would, 2 years later, he paints another model wearing the same dress. So these tea gowns that he was fascinated by. And Berthe Morisot was kind of like that herself because she is a woman, she's an artist, so she has limited access to being in the world, but her family's very wealthy, so she and the Manet family have lots of friends, fashionable friends, not like Monet and Renoir, who did not grow up with fashion. For Morisot and Manet, fashion was just part of living in an upper-class society. So there she is in a dress, and she always wore black. She loved black and she loved white, which was very unusual at a time when, as you saw, those garish stripes were in style. And there she is in this evening dress, and then she paints a portrait of a model, or she paints an anonymous model wearing her dress, which I think is really interesting. So she was sort of pushing herself onto it, and then again with another model in a kind of a scene as if she's going to a ball. Always artificial, always done in the studio. She's not painting at the ball. And there she is herself, this fashion icon of mystery and elegance, which was why Manet so admired and so wanted to paint her portrait again and again and again. And Manet, I think, is also one of the great fashion artists because he could play with fashion. He wasn't so aspirational as was Monet or Renoir. He didn't have as much at stake. He wasn't trying to be something he wasn't. He was himself. This was his milieu. And so he's showing this anonymous model wearing this wackadoo dress that did not exist. I have looked for this. So she's got this Don Quixote hat, and she's got this strange riding crop, and then she's got this dress, but it's not a riding dress because it's not cut on the diagonal because you can get on a horse. It's cut straight across. But what we wanted to show in the exhibition was how close it comes in terms of the fabric to that multicolor, and what happens to black when you blast color on it. Black taffeta with light on it has purple and pink, all of the colors that you find in Manet's portrait of whomever, or this standing life size from Stockholm. And there it is again, where you could see just that what Manet was doing was not inventing color coming out of black. He was simply painting the reflections that you could see when black taffeta is lit up. Seeing and being seen, ball dresses. The ball dress, of course, is the slowest changing fashion. Sargent once said, I only want to paint women in ball dresses because they don't get old. They don't go out of style as fast, and ball dresses today still look kind of like this. So here's Jean Barrault. We had to show you this kind of photographic precision of a ball dress at a very fancy ball, as opposed to these to these artificial, not wonderful single women who are at a ball, but of course it's set up in the studio. But they are more convincing than this photographic where you can see every single person, you can identify them. These anonymous girls have that freshness and directness, and we almost feel like we are there with them, with these dresses. And this was the cut. So off the shoulders, otherwise women would never bare their shoulders. They would never be without a hat and gloves. It was at the ball that they could show enough skin. And I think my theory is that this kind of a ball dress, this décolleté, comes from that ballerina, or maybe the ballerina is echoing. I think the ballet dress comes a lot earlier from the 18th century. And that cut, I think, that is so feminine, that is so attractive, and I'm showing you your wonderful pastel from the Block collection. I think there's something there, but I haven't pursued it. And then this is the era of the designer dress, so Worth was getting his name out there, and you can see this waist, and how did this little teeny waist, and this wonderful asymmetrical satin dress that Worth made so popular, and he would just make one pattern, and people would buy it, and it depended on the goop he would put on it that personalized it. So it was always the same dress, it was just the goop that made it different. And Tissot played with fashion like Manet, and here he's showing a woman who is so out of her league. She's obviously from the provinces. All the women have on what you're supposed to be wearing, the uniform décolleté that you saw, the ballerina outfit. And she's got this high neck dickie, and she's with this man with a bad comb over, and she's wearing too much, and it looks like, and he's showing her, and it's called Le Bal, but it could be, oops, or something like that, because she is improperly dressed. And dress mattered. There were codes of dress that we don't have anymore. But throughout the 19th century, it so mattered. So when Renoir shows La Loge in the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874, the critics knew right away that this was not what she was pretending to be. This was his next favorite model, Nina. And they said, well, she is not a grande dame. She's wearing too much makeup and her hair is disheveled. So these little codes would give her away, whereas Renoir, in all sincerity, was trying to paint an upper-class woman, but he was using one of his models because at that point he didn't have clients who were upper class. And the dress, of course, was of the moment. And there she is. A little too much is what they said. But that's one of the points of the exhibition and one of the points of fashion in the 19th century. It's the H&M factor. So, on the left, you have one of his first patrons, so music publisher's wife, and she is wearing this amazing taffeta dress that was talked about when he exhibited this, and it is luxurious, and it has the proper bustle, and on the right, he is taking a fledgling actress, and he is putting her in a dress as if she was of the same social economic class as Madame Hartmann. But what we don't know is that taffeta and what is the dress in the blue? We don't know. It's paint on canvas. So he can paint. He may be looking at a canvas dress, but he's painting a dress as if it was of the same fabric as Madame Hartmann's, and that's what I'm calling the H&M. As long as you have the silhouette and you have the look, it doesn't matter that fabric is flammable and you're going to go up in flames if you get too near something, which is, H&M, it's meant for that season. It makes you fashionable at a price point that everyone can afford, or most everyone. Oh, I'm going backwards, sorry. It was fun to see that again. So what happens to Renoir? Well, in 1876, he gets the commission of his life. He gets Madame Charpentier, who is the wife of a very famous publisher who publishes naturalist novels, so Flaubert and Zola, and he gets the opportunity to paint not only her, but her children and her Newfoundland, and in their amazing Japanese-style interiors. So she is a woman of the hour. She is written about in women's magazines as somebody very sophisticated, knows place. So he gets the opportunity where he doesn't have to invent, he doesn't have to borrow a dress. He has a client who actually wears things like this, and her daughter on the left and her little boy on the right. And just look at the way Renoir has gone to town with this. Once he has the real thing, how he's made the lace on her dress, which may or may not have been there, match the Newfoundland. I mean, the dog matches the outfit. It is an incredible tour de force. It's large, as you know, from seeing it at the Met. And it's what put Renoir on the map as being a fashion portraitist. After this, they showed it 3 times, and because she was so well known, then he gets included in that. Going back to that idea of what is real, what is the H&M factor, now no longer making it up, but having the real thing. One of the things that came up in the 1860s, of course, was the development of the department store, and while we couldn't show that in the exhibition because no artist painted the department store. So here you have these city block monstrosities, Le Grand Samaritain, Printemps. You have the same stores that still exist today, the Bon Marché, and no one painted it because it was still considered a woman's paradise, but it's what allowed women to get out and do things in the afternoon without a proper chaperone. And already by 1882, you could buy everything already made. You could buy a hat, you could buy a full dress. Before, you could only buy pieces of a dress. Now you could just take it off the rack. And that's what happened, and you could buy seasonally, and the sales, and everything we understand about consumer culture today comes from this period. And this is the Opéra des Dames. So Zola writes about what it's like to be working in a department store. But the cover of the book was by an artist, Valentin, who does it. He was painting it in the 1890s because no one painted the department store. I guess it was. Tissot paints a young woman selling. She's selling ribbons in a novelty shop, but she's not in these grand magasins. It's still that kind of small shop mentality. And obviously, she's selling herself as well, which was one of the conceits of these young shop girls. So we had the hats. We had this wonderful display of hats. We had the Degas from our collection, which I always thought he made up those colors for the hats, but no, those colors existed, and every outfit had to have a matching hat. And they're just amazingly, and so you know that Degas, while he didn't paint the department store, was fascinated by how women put themselves together, by what they found, by their details, as he said, the way they accessorize, the minutes and hours that go into conceiving that trousseau. That's what fascinated him. And so in our painting, we don't really know if she's the shop girl or the client because he's kind of left it ambiguous, but the hat is floating above her head, so it could possibly be this wonderful pastel. And then I think I think that when people take an aspect of an exhibition and do another exhibition after it, that's exactly what I always hope will happen. We started something. Simon Kelly did this fantastic exhibition on the millinery shop, so he took just one segment and he went to town, and I'm wearing the same blouse. I apologize, but it's my fashion. In our exhibition, we also had this wonderful little area where we showed the shoes, these little satin slippers that were worn by all, and we actually had a shoe box. And these two paintings by Eva Gonzalez, who, as you'll remember, was Manet's only pupil, and she paints her shoes as she paints her shoes. They're maybe her wedding shoes or something like that, these pink slippers, which we were able to find. But what was even weirder, and we bought these only for this exhibition, was that after her death, so her husband was an engraver, after her death, he makes these prints, this whole series of prints with this shoe being attacked by these little Chinamen or some, like they're, attacking the citadels kind of thing. And we have no idea what was in his head, why he did that. But we bought these just for the exhibition because we thought they were so funny and weird. So, a woman in a corset is a lie, a falsehood, a fiction, but for us, this is much better than real life. And that gets us to under fashion. You can't have fashion without under fashion, as I've said several times in this lecture. It's the profile, it's the silhouette, it's what makes that particular moment in fashion different from the moment before because something has changed. Now it's big sleeves for us. It used to be small sleeves. So, and one of the great fashion statements was Manet's early Woman with a Parrot, where he shows a woman wearing the garment that you wear before and getting out of bed, that you don't wear anything under. And so this was a life-size portrait of someone who should not be wearing this in a life-size painting, pretending to be something that is, respectable. And what was more is that she's holding a man's monocle. So it's this kind of like she's holding a monocle, and then there's this parrot, and then there's this weird, rind of a lemon or an orange or something, and nothing fits together. Nothing makes sense. But what did make sense to the critics, and the only way they could understand it, was this incredible pink satin. They read those brushstrokes as having some kind of satiny quality to them. And I'm comparing it to a wonderful painting by Tissot at the Getty, the exact same moment, same idea, woman wearing an interior gown, not a peignoir exactly, but she's wearing a peignoir that's much more respectable. But Tissot gives you every single detail about it. He's going to tell you where that woman lived, what she had in her interior, what her wealth is, whereas Manet is just sticking things together, playing with fashion, knowing that he's making a very ambiguous and perplexing statement. And the Tissot, not only is it so readable, but when they bought it at the Getty, it was from the same family, Madame the Marquise de Miramont, and the children or the grandchildren, the great-grand, gave them a swatch of Grandmama's fabric. So it's cut velvet. And when you see the cut velvet and you go back to the way Tissot's painting it, it actually really does imitate that in a weird way. So we showed that too. And then, as I said, modernity really comes in the 1870s when they invent the walking dress and when the streets of Paris are opened up because of Haussmann's incredible renovations of the city to where it is now, the city that we know now, not with cobblestones, but certainly with these radiating intersections. And you find women actually out more shopping, but also just wearing clothes that could actually function as streetwear. And in our painting, the man has got his jacket open. It's that gesture of nonchalance. It's that specific way of wearing fashion. It's not just fast fashion. It's how you wear fashion that makes you fashionable. And that's what Baudelaire sought in his essay in the 1860s. And this is just an example of that. And you could detach that lower ruffle, and you could wash that and put it back. So it was the era of practicalities, and cuffs could come off, and collars could come off. And this made a huge difference in the way that people could wear fashion in a more practical and more outdoorsy way. And this is the way that, that crinoline now looks. It was an attachment, and now it becomes a bustle, which would get larger and larger throughout the decade. And that's what happens. You have this strapotin. A strapotin simply is this little bustle that kind of goes when you sit on it, and you can wrap yards of material around it. So all of that crinoline fabric is now wrapped in the back, and it reaches its apogee in 1886. And this was so interesting for me because when we were looking for paintings, I wanted this one because I thought this dress was so homemade looking. It looked like and I found that the family had given it to the Musée d'Orsay because the wife of the artist who is pictured died soon after he painted it, and he put her costume in a box and gave it to Orsay, and they had it in the basement. And I said, well, we have to take it out of its box. We have to pay for it to be restructured. And what did I find was that it also was a big bustle dress, which you would never know from the painting straight on, and you wouldn't know from it in its, embalmed in the box. So, and as I said, the bustle just keeps getting bigger, but it allows for that incredible silhouette, which artists really picked up on. The idea of this tall hat, so elongating the spine. So if you think about wearing a bustle and you're just automatically, you have this wonderful curve and quite an attractive line, which is why so many artists showed their models in profile. And these are just some of worst dress from the New York the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan. Practical, men's jackety kind of, but with this wonderful back bustle. And Worth, at this moment in the 1880s, that he actually starts putting his brand, the very first designer brand, in the waistband of his clothes. And of course, the greatest parody of fashion is Seurat's Sunday en la Grande Jatte, Sunday afternoon en la Grande Jatte, where he not only makes fun of it, but he parodies it in a way that had never been done before. And what's fascinating for us is that if you think about this, Seurat shows this, and he wants to show it in 1884, but he doesn't finish it. At that time, the painting looked like this. Her skirt was like that. This skirt came, I can't find it, came right there. So, but then by 1886, well, the bustle was bigger, and so he had to go out. He had to make it of his time, so he had to add on, and you can see when you're in front of the painting, look at it. The grass runs through it. He didn't allow negative space. He painted over the grass to get this extra 2-4 inches of the bustle. But this is also the death knell of Paris being the hub of that idea of urban fashion being a subject for vanguard painters. Because with Seurat's La Grande Jatte, we call it the end of Impressionism. And with this, it's also the end of Paris being where the avant-garde wants to find their subject matters. Then we have post-impressionism with Gauguin and Van Gogh and artists who were leaving the city looking for their theme outside of the city and certainly outside of any kind of a fashion sense. And so it's not the excitement that was in the 1860s. And you have Monet, one of his last paintings is actually of a figure painting, but it's Camille. It's a sort of memorial to his dead wife, and he shows her in this kind of Seurat-like fashion. And we know that Seurat was looking at Monet, Monet was looking back at Seurat. But Monet by now is doing water lilies. Monet has left Paris, he's living at Giverny, And that's why we ended it where we did, because fashion takes a minor place. So thank you very much, and I hope this has been fashionable for you. That's sort of naughty. If there's anyone has a question, or I shouldn't leave that one on, that's kind of naughty. Let me get back to something that's not so naughty. Or you can catch me afterwards. Yeah, okay. I went really quickly, but I was told 7 o'clock was our cutoff time. So when I see that, thank you for coming.